In the midst of World War II, the Pacific theater became a proving ground for new, innovative forms of warfare. One of the most unexpected and effective weapons in the arsenal of the Allied forces was the PT boat, the fast, agile, and stealthy vessels that would play a crucial role in turning the tide of battle against the mighty Imperial Japanese Navy. PT boats, short for patrol torpedo boats, were small, lightweight crafts that relied on speed, maneuverability, and surprise to carry out attacks. They were designed specifically for hit-and-run tactics, often striking before the enemy even had time to react. These boats were powered by large engines capable of propelling them at speeds that left larger vessels in their wake, making them incredibly difficult to target. While other battleships and aircraft were designed for head-on confrontations, PT boats were all about one thing: striking from the shadows. But how did such seemingly modest vessels become so formidable against one of the most powerful navies in the world? To understand their importance, we first need to look at the context in which they were used. When the United States entered the war in 1941, it faced the daunting task of fighting the Japanese, whose naval forces were well-equipped, disciplined, and backed by years of experience. The Japanese Navy had some of the most advanced warships of the time, including the massive battleships and aircraft carriers that ruled the Pacific. Facing such a well-equipped enemy, the U.S. Navy needed a weapon that could circumvent the larger ships and hit the enemy where they least expected it, under the cover of night, when the Japanese Navy felt most confident. Enter the PT boat, a relatively small, fast-moving vessel equipped with powerful torpedoes and machine guns. These boats could operate in shallow waters, close to shore, and in areas where larger ships could not follow. But it wasn't just their size that made them effective. It was their ability to strike swiftly and disappear just as quickly. They were the embodiment of guerrilla warfare on water. The development of PT boats began as early as 1939, and by the time the U.S. entered World War II, several prototypes had been tested and refined. The boats were designed with the idea of being used as torpedo boats, and while they were not capable of sinking larger ships in one shot, they were perfect for harassing enemy convoys, hitting supply ships, and targeting smaller vessels with precision and speed. One of the most important features of the PT boat was its size. At only 80 to 85 feet long, they were far smaller than traditional naval vessels. This allowed them to evade radar detection and slip in and out of tight spots. Their lightweight construction made them ideal for high-speed operations, and their armament, including torpedoes, depth charges, and machine guns, gave them just enough firepower to be effective in combat. But perhaps the most crucial aspect of these boats was their ability to operate at night. In the Pacific, the nights were long and the skies were often clear. The boats, painted in dark colors, could slip in and out of enemy territory without being spotted. They struck in the cover of darkness, making them a perfect weapon for surprise attacks, catching the Japanese off guard. The element of surprise was the PT boat's greatest advantage, and it was one that the Japanese would soon learn to fear. In this section, we've established why PT boats were so important to the success of the Allies in the Pacific. They weren't just fast boats, they were an evolution in naval warfare. But what really set them apart was their ability to outmaneuver and outsmart an enemy that was used to conventional naval combat. The next question is, how did the Japanese react when they faced these small, seemingly insignificant boats that seemed to come out of nowhere? When most people think of naval warfare, they imagine massive battleships and aircraft carriers engaged in all-out combat. The roar of cannons, the flight of bombers, the crashing of waves against colossal hulls. These are the images that come to mind. But in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean during World War II, a quieter, more elusive weapon was quietly rewriting the rules of naval combat. The PT boat, a small, fast, and stealthy craft, became the ultimate weapon of surprise, and it was this very ability to strike from the shadows that stunned the Japanese and had a lasting impact on the war. In a conventional naval battle, opponents lined up their ships and fought in direct engagements. But PT boats were not designed for such face-to-face encounters. Instead, they thrived in hit-and-run tactics, where the goal was not to engage in prolonged combat, but to strike quickly and then disappear into the night. These boats were built for stealth. Their small size allowed them to sneak through the darkness unnoticed, and their ability to travel at incredible speeds meant they could strike quickly before an enemy even knew they were there. One of the key advantages of PT boats was their ability to operate under the cover of darkness. The vastness of the Pacific was often illuminated only by the moon and stars, creating a night sky so dark that radar systems of the time had difficulty detecting such small targets. The boats were painted in dark colors, navy blue or black, so that they blended in with the ocean at night. Their small profile, combined with their nighttime operations, made them incredibly difficult for Japanese forces to track. The boats didn't rely on conventional radar detection. Instead, they would use spotlights and radar units to locate enemy ships, especially convoys that were moving in tight formation. PT boat crews would often rely on a technique known as chasing the wake. They would follow the wake of enemy ships in the dark, using the movement of the water to guide them to their targets. The PT boats would circle around and strike the enemy ships with torpedoes before retreating just as quickly. The Japanese forces, accustomed to the massive naval battles they were used to, found it nearly impossible to defend against these quick and unpredictable attacks. Perhaps one of the most underrated aspects of the PT boats' effectiveness was the psychological impact they had on the Japanese. The Japanese were used to facing large-scale naval engagements, with heavy artillery and massive warships on both sides. But these small, fast boats were like shadows, difficult to catch, even harder to predict, and deadly when they struck. The Japanese often underestimated the threat posed by PT boats. Initially, they believed these small vessels were nothing more than minor nuisances, hardly worthy of a full-scale response. However, the continued attacks and the strategic significance of these small boats began to take their toll. These surprise torpedo strikes created panic and confusion within the Japanese Naval Command. Japanese naval planners had always relied on the notion of superiority in firepower. The overwhelming strength of their fleet was considered to be the key to victory. Yet here was a force that wasn't interested in conventional combat. They were striking from unexpected places, taking advantage of the cover of night and the limitations of their enemy's radar. This constant sense of vulnerability proved to be a major morale hit for the Japanese Navy. PT boats didn't just cause physical damage. They also disrupted Japanese strategies. The Japanese were forced to rethink their approach to naval combat. They could no longer rely on the safety of their heavily armed convoys or the predictability of large naval engagements. The threat of sudden attacks left them vulnerable, and their entire strategy of overwhelming force started to unravel. At times, Japanese ships would fire indiscriminately at shadows, unsure of where the threat was coming from. They had never dealt with an adversary like this before. A hallmark of PT boat operations was their use of torpedo strikes. In the open sea, PT boats would move in closely to enemy ships, often under cover of night, and launch their torpedoes with deadly precision. However, these weren't your standard, slow-moving torpedoes. The Mark 8 torpedo used by PT boats was a high-speed weapon capable of traveling at 46 knots, more than double the speed of many conventional torpedoes. The faster they could launch their torpedoes, the less time the enemy had to react, and this was the key to the PT boat's success. The crew would often engage in a series of calculated maneuvers before firing their torpedoes. They would circle the enemy vessel, using their speed and maneuverability to get in position, often at close range. This meant that they had to be precise. A single missed torpedo could mean disaster, as the PT boats were not heavily armed and could be easily destroyed if caught in the open. To improve their odds, the PT boat crews would often operate in groups of 3 to 6 boats, ensuring they had sufficient firepower to overwhelm the target. The boats would fan out around the target, attacking from multiple angles. This made it difficult for the Japanese to defend themselves. Even if one boat missed its target, others would make up for it. The strikes were rapid, relentless, and terrifying in their precision. The element of surprise combined with the group tactics made PT boats a force to be reckoned with, especially in the unpredictable environment of the Pacific theater. While the PT boats were incredibly effective, their operations came with significant risks. The Japanese quickly realized that these boats, though small, were capable of inflicting real damage. As a result, they began to adapt their tactics to defend against these surprise attacks. The Japanese developed countermeasures, including setting up stronger night patrols and using more advanced radar systems to detect the boats earlier. Additionally, Japanese ships began to fire in all directions during night convoys, hoping to hit any attacking PT boats. This created a dangerous environment for the PT boat crews, who often faced intense anti-aircraft fire, even though their boats were much smaller than the Japanese vessels. The risk of being hit by a single shot was constant. Yet despite these dangers, the crews of the PT boats remained resilient, adapting to each new challenge. They had the advantage of speed, which allowed them to slip away quickly if the tide turned against them. Their ability to operate in small, tight groups also helped reduce the risk of being overwhelmed by enemy fire. In the end, the stealth and surprise tactics of the PT boats played a pivotal role in shaping the Pacific War. While the Japanese Navy focused on traditional methods of large-scale naval engagements, the PT boats used their speed and stealth to strike where their opponents least expected it. They were the unseen predators of the Pacific, fast, lethal, and elusive. But the impact of the PT boats went beyond just their immediate successes. The psychological warfare they engaged in had a profound effect on the Japanese, causing them to reevaluate their strategies and tactics. The very idea that a small, fast-moving boat could strike terror into the hearts of the mighty Japanese fleet was something the Japanese had not prepared for. As the war progressed, PT boats continued to deliver a series of stunning blows, leaving behind a trail of confusion and fear. They had proven that size and firepower were not the only measures of naval strength. Speed, surprise, and agility could be just as deadly. The successes of PT boat operations in the Pacific were nothing short of remarkable. These small, nimble vessels struck fear into the hearts of the Japanese, who were unaccustomed to facing such an unconventional form of warfare. The PT boats didn't just deliver tactical victories. They also had a profound psychological impact that reverberated throughout the Japanese Navy. Despite being outmatched in terms of size and firepower, the boats proved to be a lethal force in their own right. They inflicted damage that went beyond physical destruction. They undermined Japanese strategies and crippled their confidence in their own naval superiority. Some of the most notable PT boat successes came during key battles in the Pacific. The boats became particularly famous for their role in the Battle of the Philippines. In 1941, shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese launched a brutal invasion of the Philippines, hoping to expand their hold over Southeast Asia. However, PT boats played a crucial role in harassing Japanese convoys and making the long, perilous journey across the Philippines' numerous islands a nightmare for Japanese commanders. The boats disrupted the enemy's resupply lines, attacked isolated enemy ships, and wreaked havoc on Japanese logistics. One of the most memorable engagements occurred during the Battle of Bataan, when PT boats were called into action to defend American and Filipino forces that were cornered on the peninsula. Despite being smaller and less heavily armed than the Japanese warships they faced, the PT boats launched devastating torpedo strikes that sank several Japanese vessels and forced the enemy to reconsider their plans. The boats' ability to strike quickly and disappear into the night made them nearly impossible to retaliate against. They were ghost-like predators that emerged without warning and vanished just as fast, leaving chaos in their wake. The sheer audacity of the attacks made them a force to be reckoned with, and their continued successes in the Philippines had a profound impact on the morale of both the American and Japanese forces. But the PT boats' successes weren't confined to just one region. In the Solomon Islands, another pivotal theater of the Pacific War, PT boats were instrumental in sinking Japanese ships that were attempting to reinforce their island garrisons. One of the most notable incidents occurred during the Battle of Vella Lavella, when PT boats launched a surprise attack on a Japanese convoy and sank 2 enemy vessels while evading counterattacks. These boats proved that they could take on larger enemy ships in nighttime engagements and win, and this success began to alter the dynamics of naval operations in the Pacific. However, the successes of the PT boats were not without their cost. These boats were not invulnerable. They were highly susceptible to enemy fire, and their small size meant they were easy targets for Japanese gunners and aircraft. Despite their speed and stealth, PT boats could be shot out of the water if hit by a single well-placed shell. In many operations, The boats faced fierce retaliation from Japanese destroyers, battleships, and aircraft that were out to eliminate the threat posed by these nimble vessels. The crews aboard PT boats were well aware of the risks involved, but they continued their operations with unwavering determination. Their courage under fire became legendary, and their role in the war was one of both bravery and innovation. The psychological toll on the Japanese was equally significant. At first, they had underestimated the PT boats, thinking they were little more than annoying pests that would eventually be dealt with. But as the boats continued to strike with precision and success, the Japanese were forced to adapt. They began to implement more aggressive countermeasures, but they were always playing catch-up. The PT boat's ability to operate under the cover of darkness made it nearly impossible for the Japanese to fully neutralize the threat. It was as if they were fighting an invisible enemy, one that could strike at any time, from anywhere. The Japanese had built their entire naval strategy on the concept of overwhelming force. They believed that the sheer might of their battleships, cruisers, and aircraft carriers would guarantee victory. Yet the PT boats proved that it wasn't always about size or firepower. Speed, stealth, and the ability to strike from unexpected angles could often be just as decisive. These smaller boats, equipped with nothing more than torpedoes and machine guns, were able to disrupt the Japanese war machine in a way that larger vessels could not. This new type of warfare also had a lasting effect on the tactics used by the Allies. As the war progressed, the hit-and-run tactics employed by the PT boats were adopted by other branches of the military, including submarines and even bomber aircraft. The idea of a small, fast, and highly mobile force that could strike unpredictably became a cornerstone of modern warfare. The PT boats had shown the world that naval warfare didn't have to be confined to the traditional rules of engagement. It could be shaped by innovation, surprise, and speed. As the war moved into its later stages, PT boats continued to prove their worth in a variety of theaters, including the Philippines and New Guinea. They became indispensable tools for interdiction and disruption, often striking at Japanese shipping routes, cutting off supply lines, and providing cover for larger naval forces. Their success was also due to the adaptability and resourcefulness of the men who manned them. Many of the PT boat crews were young and relatively inexperienced, but they proved to be skilled and fearless warriors who were able to outthink and outmaneuver their enemies. The legacy of the PT boat isn't just about the victories they achieved or the damage they inflicted on the Japanese Navy. It's also about the role they played in shaping the future of naval warfare. The success of these boats proved that the battlefield was no longer the exclusive domain of large ships and aircraft. It was a reminder that, in warfare, even the smallest forces can have an outsized impact. The PT boats showed that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, ingenuity, speed, and stealth could be just as effective as brute strength, and this was a lesson that would resonate in military circles for years to come. As the war in the Pacific progressed, the role of the PT boats became increasingly integral to the broader Allied strategy. While the larger, more traditional naval battles between battleships and aircraft carriers garnered most of the attention, the PT boats had already proven that even small, fast-moving vessels could change the course of a conflict. The legacy of these boats, however, extends far beyond their immediate tactical victories in World War II. The impact they had on naval warfare, both in terms of strategy and psychology, shaped future combat tactics and naval designs in the decades to come. The legacy of the PT boat in the Pacific was not just about sinking enemy ships or destroying supply lines. It was about changing the very way naval warfare was conducted. Throughout the war, the PT boats demonstrated that speed, agility, and stealth were just as valuable as heavy artillery and sheer firepower. The ability to strike quickly, disappear into the night, and disrupt enemy operations had a lasting impact on how military planners would approach maritime warfare. In fact, the success of the PT boats in the Pacific likely influenced the development of later naval strategies, including those of modern special operations forces, which emphasize small, agile units capable of executing high-stakes missions with precision. Another key aspect of the PT boats' legacy is the psychological effect they had on the Japanese forces. From the very beginning, the Japanese underestimated these small, fast boats, considering them little more than a nuisance. Yet as the war progressed, the fear of PT boats became very real. The boat's success in conducting surprise strikes and their ability to evade Japanese counterattacks shattered the illusion of invincibility that the Imperial Navy had long cultivated. The continued attacks, often at night and in remote areas, left the Japanese fleet constantly on edge. As the boats would strike, retreat, and disappear without a trace, they fostered a sense of vulnerability and uncertainty. Even the most well-protected convoys became targets, and the Japanese could not find a reliable way to neutralize this unpredictable threat. For the Allied forces, the PT boat's effectiveness underscored the importance of innovation in warfare. Traditional military doctrines often relied on brute force and sheer numbers, but the PT boats proved that smaller, more specialized forces could make a significant difference. The crews of these boats were often outnumbered, outgunned, and undertrained compared to their Japanese counterparts. But what they lacked in resources, they made up for in ingenuity and boldness. In many ways, the PT boats represented the underdog in naval warfare, showing that smaller forces, if used strategically, could make a huge impact. In addition to their tactical and psychological impact, the PT boats also left a lasting imprint on naval technology and design. The boats were designed and built quickly, with a focus on speed and maneuverability rather than size and armor. This led to the development of new technologies and techniques in boat construction, including the development of faster engines and better radar systems. The success of these boats also highlighted the importance of night operations and the potential for stealth in naval warfare, a concept that would continue to influence the design of warships and submarines for decades to come. The concept of light, fast-moving vessels also influenced the way navies would think about future operations. In the post-war years, the increased reliance on smaller, more agile craft became evident in the development of modern special forces, such as those used by the U.S. Navy SEALs and the British SAS. These forces, trained in unconventional warfare, adopted many of the strategies pioneered by PT boat crews, striking swiftly and without warning, exploiting their enemies' vulnerabilities, and relying on speed rather than brute strength to achieve victory. The influence of the PT boats also reached beyond naval warfare. The tactics employed by the boats, hitting targets quickly, disappearing into the night, and exploiting weaknesses in the enemy's defenses, were mirrored in a variety of fields, from air warfare to guerrilla tactics on land. The PT boats were a precursor to modern special operations tactics, where small, highly trained units strike at the heart of enemy operations and then vanish before the enemy can retaliate. These tactics, born out of the need to fight a superior opponent with fewer resources, have since been adopted by militaries around the world. As the war wound down, the PT boats continued to play a crucial role in the final stages of the Pacific conflict. They were integral to the success of the island-hopping strategy, which involved isolating and bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions while cutting off their supply lines. The boats were able to strike Japanese ships attempting to reinforce or resupply their forces on remote islands, effectively cutting off their to wage war in these isolated areas. In many ways, the PT boats became the unsung heroes of the island-hopping campaign, ensuring that the Japanese could not resupply their troops, and ultimately contributing to the success of the broader Allied strategy. Yet despite their incredible contributions, PT boats did not receive the same recognition as the larger warships that dominated the headlines. The war's most iconic battles were fought by massive fleets of aircraft carriers and battleships, while the PT boats operated in the shadows. It wasn't until much later that the true value of these boats was recognized. Their role in the war remained somewhat overshadowed by the more famous ships and planes, but the importance of their contributions cannot be overstated. They had shown the world that smaller forces, if used intelligently, could turn the tide of battle. The end of World War II saw the rapid decommissioning of many PT boats, as they were no longer needed in the post-war world. However, their legacy lived on. The strategies they pioneered continued to shape naval warfare for years to come. The boats themselves became symbols of innovation and courage, and their crews were remembered for their bravery and resourcefulness. The PT boats had proven that in war, it wasn't always about the size of your force, but how you used it. They had changed the face of naval combat and left a lasting impact on military strategy, technology, and tactics that would resonate for decades to come. In conclusion, the legacy of the PT boats is one of innovation, bravery, and adaptability. These small vessels, often overlooked in the grand scope of World War II, prove that unconventional tactics could be just as powerful as traditional military might. The boats' successes in disrupting Japanese operations and their ability to operate in stealth made them a key element in the eventual Allied victory in the Pacific. But their influence didn't stop there. The tactics they pioneered would influence naval warfare, special operations, and even the broader field of military strategy for years to come. In many ways, the PT boats were a glimpse into the future of warfare, where smaller, faster, and more specialized forces could achieve victory against a much larger enemy.